For the introduction, for intelligence test purpose, the purpose is to measure cognitive abilities. The purpose is to understand the verbal comprehension, the reasoning, and the memory of the client. It's to identify the strengths and support needs of understanding how can the providers better support the needs of the client. It's not a measure of worth because it's not about labeling. It's more about learning how the child thinks and how the child learns to better understand how to help assist the strengths and to help support the weaknesses. Now, for Liam specifically, the WISC-4 test helps test the learning profile to explore exactly what type of a learner Liam is. It might help discover specialized interventions. It might recognize the particular strengths to build upon, as discussed before. And the WISC-4 test is reliable. Now, what does reliable mean? So, what is reliability? Well, in simple terms, reliability means consistency, which is a reliable test would give a steady result over time, not random results. So think of a bathroom scale as an analogy. If you weigh yourself 3 times in a row and it says the same thing, it's probably reliable. Also consider having 2 different scales, and if I step onto both scales, they should give exactly the same or very closely similar values. So in psychological testing, if we want Liam's test scores to reflect who he is or his true abilities, we don't want the test to vary too much between different test administrators. We don't want to have them change across too quick of a time. Obviously, his abilities might change after a couple of years, but if we take it on one day and then the next day it's drastically different, it's not as reliable because it's less consistent. Now that I've explained what reliability means, here's how reliability can be increased. So first is administration standardization. This means that the test is always given the same way using official instructions, timing, materials, or conditions as prescribed in official norms. We want to make sure that the conditions will lead to extremely similar results if a different administrator would be giving the very similar results if they follow the same protocol. And the consistency comes from evidence-based protocols. Second, there are retesting options. So if the same test is given to a child more than once and the tests stay similar, that will show more reliability. Getting multiple perspectives from trained professionals also adds more accurate data. So if the parents get the test administered by one provider and then they go to a different provider, that can show more reliability if both providers are giving very similar results. Next is the consistency analysis to evaluate validity. Is the test actually valid? Which we'll explore next. Let's discuss validity in simple terms. It simply means accuracy, or the accuracy to measure a particular claim. So the question is, does the WISC-4 measure IQ? Yes. So if the WISC-4 is measuring IQ, that makes the WISC-4 valid in measuring that particular claim of IQ. Now, validity can be thought of as an analogy to a thermometer. A thermometer is valid in measuring body temperature. A thermometer does not measure blood pressure, and a thermometer does not measure IQ. Here's how to ensure test validity, or how to make sure that tests are valid. So first, they compare the test to other known measures of testing IQ, or of testing whatever they're trying to measure. So if the WISC-4 is matching up with other known IQ tests, it's more of a convergent validity, meaning it's measuring a similar or same construct. Secondly, there has to be a predicting future performance, where the IQ test is predicting how is this client, or how is Liam specifically, going to perform in the future based on how the test displays in its values and numbers. So thirdly, The WISC-4 actually predicts academic performance according to Canevez 2013. So if the WISC-4 is predicting the academic performance, then it's showing that this test is valid and be able to understand whether or not the future can be predicted. So next, let's get into the test interpretation of the Verbal Comprehension Index, or VCI for short. So the VCI score reflects Liam's ability to understand and use verbal language, including vocabulary or comprehension or reasoning with words, overall just the usage of verbal language. Now, he scored 112, which was within the 79th percentile, which means that he performed better than 79 out of 100 children in his age on these tests. So his score is 0.8 standard deviations above the average, which puts him solidly in the above average range. Now, the confidence interval is between 105 and 118, which means that even with minor testing variations, such as if a different administrator were to give the test, his true score would likely fall within that range, still within above the mean. This is a significant strength for Liam. It suggests that he learns well through spoken explanations, reading, and discussion, and that his verbal learning environments might be especially effective for him. Now let's look at the test interpretation for 3 additional areas of the WISC-4. First is the PRI, which is the Perceptual Reasoning Index. His Perceptual Reasoning Index was 110, which is about 0.67 standard deviations above the mean, or roughly 10 points above their average. That places him around the 75th percentile. That means 75 out of 100 children his age, he can score better at then. And this reflects his strong abilities in solving visual problems, puzzles, with his reasoning perception. So for example, this might fit into his Lego building. Next is the WMI, which is the Working Memory Index. Now, in his WMI, he scored 83, which is about 1.13 standard deviations below the mean, around 70 points lower than the average. That places him in the 13th percentile, which means he scored higher than only 13% of the peers, so he can only beat around 13 out of 100 of his peers on average. This is considered below average and suggests challenges with holding and manipulating information mentally, because the working memory is having a little bit of struggle and challenges. So this might lead to him having problems with multiple step directions, remembering what he had just read, or completing assignments without reminders. Finally, his Processing Speed Index, or PSI, he scored 94, which is just 0.4 standard deviation below the mean, putting him in the average range, or maybe a little bit below the average on the lower side. He scored at the 34th percentile, meaning he can complete his tasks slower than most peers, but doesn't mean he isn't capable. It just means that he might take a little bit more time to process things than normal, that he can beat 34 out of 100 of his peers. Overall, this pattern highlights a key strength in perceptual reasoning while having large issues with his working memory and slight issues with his processing speed. So the test interpretation for the full-scale IQ score, or FSIQ, was 103. This is the summary score based on all 4 areas of the WISC-4, which is the verbal comprehension, the perceptual reasoning, the working memory, and the processing speed. His score of 103 places him within the 75th percentile, meaning he scored higher than 75 out of 100 children of his age. And he's around the average range because the standard deviation is 0.2 standard deviations above the mean. So slightly above the average IQ of 100, not too dramatic, but meaningful in terms of showing overall competence. The confidence interval for the score of 102 through 117, which tells us that if Liam took the test again, his score would likely fall somewhere within that range due to natural variation within score taking. Even at the low end, 102 is still within the average range. Overall, this score confirms that Liam is functioning cognitively at a typical level for his age, with certain areas where he stands out that he's a little bit further better, and other areas that he's a little bit more behind. But overall, he is around average. So for the test interpretation of what percentile rank meaning is, that percentile is basically the comparison to peers. It tells us how the test taker, Liam, compares to his peers. So if 75th percentile would mean that he scores better than 75 out of 100 of his peers of his age. So it's a national sample, children around his age. So overall, it reflects where he stands among his age group. So test interpretation for confidence intervals meanings. So what is that? I've discussed it before, but I wanted to get further into it on this slide. So the confidence interval is the range of possible scores based on possible variations, because the confidence interval reflects possible test variations, because each provider of the test might conduct and administer the test a little bit differently. That causes a small range of what Liam might receive. So Liam's FSIQ, or full skill IQ, range is 102 to 117. And so if he were to take the test again, he might not get his previous score, but he will most likely stay within that 102 to 117 range, which is great because he is between average to a high average, where he has some disadvantages and he has some advantages that he can work on. So in conclusion, to summarize Liam's current intellectual profile, his overall intelligence level, the summary for his current level being age 9, his results show an opportunity for a growth mindset, because if he has a growth mindset, he can definitely improve. So it's all about planning around his strengths and weaknesses. So he has an average intellectual functioning compared with age expectations. And for the mixed results, he has an above average academic potential, but he has a reduced speed and memory reduction. So his speed and his memory performances might not be as fast, but it seems like he has a potential for more academic performance. Now, there's strengths for above average verbal comprehension. He has above average perceptual reasoning. He has strong language learning and reasoning. His weaknesses are below average working memory, slightly low average processing speed, and this might reduce his routine speeds. So this is something to keep in mind. And for the final references page, there's Canavez 2013 for the incremental validity of the WISC-4 in predicting academic achievement, and Cohen, Schneider, and Tobin 2022, which is the book for the class, Psychological Testing and Assessment, An Introduction to Tests and Measurements, McGraw Hill. Thank you for joining me and learning more about the WISC test and explaining test concepts for IQ results in my presentation. Bye.